Hi everyone, welcome to our Science Alert Hangout today, brought to you by the University of Waikato. I'm very excited today because we're talking all about Antarctica, and we have two very special guests, Dr. Charles Lee and Gemma Collins, who have both recently returned from doing research in one of the most extreme places on Earth, in Antarctica. So they are from the University of Waikato and ICTAR, which stands for the International Centre of Terrestrial Antarctic Research. And they're going to be answering all of your questions today, from how they got started, what they studied at uni, what their work involves, how they deal with the cold, and pretty much anything else you want to find out about research on the ice. So if you're watching on YouTube or on Twitter or on Facebook, ask us questions in the comments, or you can tweet to us on Antarctica Hangout, the hashtag. So I'll let Gemma and Charles tell you a little bit more about their work, but basically Gemma is looking at tiny arthropods called springtails that live in Antarctica, and she's using them to find out a bit more about how animals will adapt to changing climates. And Charles is studying microbes in some of the most extreme places on Earth, including Antarctica's dry valleys and deep-sea hydrothermal vents. Thank you both for joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
No worries. So to begin with, tell us a little bit about your work. We'll start with you, Charles. What do you mainly work on when you're in Antarctica? I know it changes a lot depending on the project, but what's your main focus?
Well, our main focus is to understand how the ecosystem of the Antarctic dry valleys works. And it's a very unusual ecosystem in that it's essentially a cold desert. But there are no plants, and there are no animals larger than what Gemma works on, which is a springtail. It's an arthropod, and this means that basically all the life that is in the dry valleys is microbial, and a very intimate connection between these microbes and the environment itself, and that gives us a very unique opportunity to understand how life is shaped by these physical and chemical forces, which we simply cannot do in any other environment, because in any other environment, trees would influence all the biology around it. Animals influence the biology underneath them. Whereas in Antarctica, it gives us a very unique window into how the physical and chemical properties of the environment affect microorganisms.
Absolutely, that's fascinating. And Gemma, tell us a bit about your work with springtails.
Yeah, so if you have a look at the Antarctic landscape, it looks quite bare, and as Charles was just saying, that there's no trees, and you have to look quite closely before you can see anything. You can't see the microbes, but what I'm working on is the springtails. They're about 1 millimeter in length, so they're pretty small, but you can see them. And they're found on the underside of rocks and stones that are quite close to water, and there's not much water there. It's quite a dry environment, a very dry environment. So the areas that I study are only small spaces. So this year we were in the Taylor Valley and next to a pond, so I was able to go as well. And I'm looking at the genetics of these springtails and how the genetic diversity might be impacted by climate change, and if the years continue to warm and the air temperatures continue to increase, how might that affect the genetic diversity of these animals, which are key players in the Antarctic systems.
That's really, really interesting. And, tell me a little bit about the springtails, because they, obviously, as you said, it looks like quite a barren environment. Are they little tiny spiders, being arthropods? What do they look like, and how big are they?
Yeah, absolutely. No one really, you don't really know what they look like until you see them, I guess. But they kind of look like miniature ants, even though they're not ants and they're not animals. So they're in the phylum Arthropoda, which means they have an exoskeleton, they have segmented body and jointed legs, and they're quite cute. I think they're cute.
They're not poisonous. Every time we have animals in the southern hemisphere, near Australia and New Zealand, everyone assumes they're deadly.
No, they're not deadly. They're quite cute and vulnerable.
Awesome. Well, we've had a few questions on Facebook already. So Liam, who has just finished high school, is wondering what you guys studied at uni and how you got your first research job in Antarctica. It's obviously a field a lot of students would love to get into, but aren't quite sure how to go about it. So how did you guys get your starts?
Well, you could do what Gemma is doing, which is to do research as a student in Antarctica. Well, that gets you a spot in Antarctica. For me, I studied biology in undergraduate, and I'm sure Gemma did the same. I didn't do Antarctic work until I finished my PhD. And essentially, what had happened was that I was encouraged to apply for a fellowship, and I looked around, and the topic of Antarctica was suggested to me, and so I wrote a proposal saying that I'll do 3 years of research in Antarctica as a postdoctoral fellow, and I got funded, so I started doing Antarctic work, and I just stayed down there, I guess.
Fantastic. And how about you, Gemma? So what did you study before you was doing your research that you're on now?
So when I was at school, I never did any biology courses, but I decided when I came to Waikato, I was going to do biology. It's what I enjoyed the most in my first year here. So in my second and third years, I did all the biology courses, and then I was fortunate to have 2 of the summer research scholarships that they offer here. So there's a 3-month period over summer where there's no classes, so that's a good opportunity to get a little bit of experience working in the labs here. And those projects I was working on Arctic springtails. I didn't go to the Arctic, but there were samples that were already in the fridge that I was able to work on. And then I was fortunate to just carry the project into my master degree, and I was able to go down just in the summer gone and collect samples that I'm going to process for my master's. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Charles, we've had someone ask how the microbes you're studying, can live in such extreme conditions. Obviously, it's quite really, really dry and extremely cold down in the dry valleys, and also near the hydrothermal sea vents. How do microbes survive? What have they evolved that lets them live there?
Well, the environment is extreme from our perspective, but to microorganisms who are extremely metabolically flexible, it's not particularly extreme. They adapt to the environment. Now, I'm not saying that any bug that you pick up is going to have that versatility, but bacteria as a life form is very adaptive, and over time, because this didn't happen overnight. If Antarctica went from a tropical forest to what it is now overnight, nothing would survive. But of course, Antarctica was last a tropical forest about 30 million years ago, and since then there's been the growth of the ice sheet and the shrinking, the growth, and the regrowth, and so on. So the microbes in that environment have had a long time to adapt to those particular conditions. So to them, it's not particularly extreme. Now, of course, they would have special adaptations that allow them to survive the temperature fluctuation and the lack of light and the lack of moisture. But those are in part what we're interested in. But mostly, I think it's because going back to the lack of more complex organisms, and that's what makes the Antarctic dry valleys such a unique environment for studying microbiology.
So I suppose if there had been such a big, diverse range of trees and plants and other animals, maybe they wouldn't have survived in this kind of environment.
It all depends on the time scale. Again, if sufficient time is allowed for evolution to take place, then things will survive. But if it's a catastrophic event, so let's say if a volcano erupted and covered everything, that's a very drastic event, and evolution doesn't work on that time scale. But in terms of what happened in Antarctica over the past 30 million years, the shift was gentle enough and gradual enough that that life had the opportunity to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. And a question for both of you. Andrew's asked, is it still very dangerous to work in Antarctica? You know, you hear about researchers getting frostbite, people getting lost in the snow, losing their fingers and toes. Has technology gotten rid of all those risks, or is it still quite a dangerous job being down there?
Well, they do issue us with a lot of the safety equipment that we need and a lot of jackets and jerseys.
They don't just send you out there with a like Bear Grylls kit or anything.
No, I got like 5 pairs of gloves that were all different in some way or something. So they definitely kit you out before you go.
I think there's different degrees of danger in working in Antarctica. Where we work, it's not particularly dangerous because the temperature is not that extreme, and as long as you act sensibly, you probably are well out of harm's way. On the other hand, there are areas where and situations where you may find it quite hazardous. So, for example, on Erebus, early on in the season, you will be looking at -40 the whole time, and so -40 degrees outside, then that severely impacts your ability to move, and you have to be very careful in every movement and everything you do. But by and large, I think it's not so much technology that has reduced the danger, but the way we approach the environment is now much more rounded. I think we acknowledge that there is danger, and then we are very well equipped and very well trained to recognize these dangerous situations and try to avoid them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Relief Awareness has asked on Twitter, what is the most dangerous thing you've faced in Antarctica so far? Has it been the cold, the animals? I guess there aren't many terrifying animals, but in general, the animal species, or has it been something else, kind of going a little stir crazy, being locked up there over the southern summer? What do you guys think?
I don't know. What do you think was the most interesting?
I think because we were walking quite a lot when we were down there, and it was quite rocky and unstable ground. So I think for me the most dangerous thing was trying to look after my ankles, that I don't roll them on all the unstable ground, which, yeah, maybe that's not what you would think of what's most dangerous.
Fair point.
Yeah, no, if you break your ankle, you're going to have a hard time getting out. But certainly there are plenty of situations where it's a lot more dangerous. I've had situations where, we really worried about breaking through ice, and we really worried about getting stuck in the middle of nowhere with a storm coming in. Those are real dangers still, and I think again it goes back to understanding the environment and trying to mitigate those risks.
And maybe the other thing is the weather changes really quickly down there too, so you have to make sure you're always prepared and you always have an extra jacket and beanie and gloves and things, and always have the emergency equipment that you need.
And you guys mostly work down there in summer, as you were saying. What's the average temperature that you're sort of dealing with, I guess, in the dry valleys? You mentioned up in Erebus, which is the biggest mountain in Antarctica. It's a lot colder, but in general, what's the temperature range?
Well, I think in January, you will, during the day, it is most likely above 0. But with wind chill, the effective temperature is probably somewhere between -5 to -10. If you have bad weather, as we did for a few days during our trip, I think it went down to probably -15 with wind chill. And earlier on in the season, because for most people, the Antarctic summer, the research season ends in early February, but it starts in early October. So if you go in October, then you're looking at -20 air temperature and -30 easily.
Just a pleasant chill then.
No, yeah.
That's pretty full, definitely pretty full on, I think, compared to working in the lab. Especially in the middle of summer, it's quite extreme temperatures. We've also had some questions about the specific skills that you've had to learn, that you think you've learned on top of the science to work in Antarctica.
I think for me, I was fortunate that in my upbringing, my dad is quite a keen outdoors person, so I already knew a lot about camping and how to put up tents and sleeping bags and cookers and all that type of thing. And I think that if you go to Antarctica to do science, then you're going to be out in the field and you're going to be using that sort of equipment. But that's not a prerequisite. There is 2 days of training when you arrive, so those kind of skills are not something that is necessary. But for me, I found that it helped.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm not big on camping, and I think certainly when I first started working in Antarctica, there was a very initial shock period that it took me a while to get over the fact that we are in the middle of nowhere, and there's very little for you to survive on compared with, I mean, you don't have any of the modern conveniences such as a plumbing system. So I think initially it will be a shock for a lot of people, but again, the training that's provided by Antarctica, New Zealand, I think is very adequate in preparing most people for what they need to do in the field.
Yeah, and that's something interesting actually that I wanted to ask about, and a few people on Facebook have been asking as well. You obviously, I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but because it's such an environmentally sensitive area and such an untouched continent, you sort of have to go in and leave no footprint. I mean, you can't build houses that are long, you can't build plumbing systems, you can't leave any rubbish behind. You know, what are some of the strangest things that you've had to deal with? And I've heard the bathroom situation is a little weird, if I'm allowed to ask about that.
Well, I think of course you're allowed. I think Gemma probably can give you a very fresh perspective.
Yeah.
I'm used to it now.
It's easier for boys. It's always easier.
Yes, as a female out there, it is a little awkward and difficult, but it's something that you just get used to, and you don't have a choice. So it's not really a problem. You just deal with it.
Bottles and buckets are involved.
Yeah.
And you take out everything, including all the biological waste that is left. You know, you don't leave anything behind. Is that right?
Yep.
Which is nice. Nice on the environment, definitely. And Diana on Facebook has asked, do you also grow your own food while you're there?
No. I mean, it was commented by somebody on Scott's team that Taylor Valley will be great for growing potatoes, but we don't because we'll probably starve, and also it's unlikely that anything will grow given the temperature and the light scheme, because even though it's 24-hour daylight when we're there, for much of the year there's no sunlight at all. So all the food is flown into Antarctica, basically from New Zealand. And I think that's true for nearly all the Antarctic bases. There are maybe some small hydroponic operations in some bases, but that's generally frowned upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and someone else has asked, Sawyer Griffin, how much food do you need to consume to keep your body weight up? Are you eating a lot more while you're working down in Antarctica?
They have a list of per person days how much food you need to take, so that's all organized, but certainly I felt like I was eating a lot more than I normally would, and it's quite high fat, high sugar thing, so it's a lot of salami and cheese and crackers and chocolate and bacon and hash browns and things like that. So
that's good.
No, despite her description, we do eat proper meals in Antarctica.
Yeah.
We do have frozen vegetables.
Yeah.
And pasta and rice and so on. I think depends on your workload. I think for people for what we do, which involves quite a bit of hiking, I think we do eat a lot of food because we have to. When you're out in the cold, when you're exposed to the element, even though it's not that cold, but if you're exposed for 10 hours at a time, it does drain your energy, and so we need to replenish that. But there's also plenty of periods during our time in the field where we were just sitting in the tent. Ironically, I think most people actually ate more while they were in the tent because the food is just nearby and they eat more. But generally speaking, there is more than enough food supply to keep our energy up.
And I suppose that's just the good planning that goes into it in advance. What is the base like? Do you sleep in tents? Is there a main room that you go to eat in? What's the sort of setup that you have?
At Scott Base or when we're out in the field?
I guess both. So Scott Base is obviously a larger base, but out in the field, what's the setup like?
So out in the field, we have tents that look like sort of your ordinary tent that you would use when you go camping, and they sleep, well, we normally have 2 people per tent, and then that's just where we sleep and keep all our gear, and then there's the main tent, which is much larger, and the idea is that everyone can fit in there at the same time to have dinner and that sort of thing. And this year, yeah, we had the lab, like a lab space in the back with all the science equipment that we use, and microscopes and centrifuges and things like that. And then we also had an area at the front where we had all the seats and a heater that was running for the entire 3 weeks off diesel, and yeah, snacks and hot drinks and things like that.
Nice. And Scott Base is obviously a lot more established. They have real buildings there, don't they?
Yeah, Scott Base is basically it's a giant summer camp. You live in bunk rooms, and everything, all the food is prepared for you. You just show up and eat. It's very easy. In the field, you do have to worry about your food and things like that. So we're a reasonably large camp, but we were not there for very long, which is why we were essentially self-sufficient and very comparatively. We don't put in any semi-permanent structures. There are events where they have to stay out there for 3-4 years, not continuously, but they just go back every summer. And in that case, they would set up more permanent structures called a rec tent, and those are properly big tents, and you can set up complete living quarters and bench space, canteen, and all that.
Absolutely.
So. Yeah, and at the small end, plenty of events, and this is what we used to do, is that we simply go out there with a Scott Polar tent and a couple of alpine tents, and that's it. You don't have anything. You don't have a tent that you can stand up in. So we're sort of somewhere between that and a proper permanent camp.
It's such a cool experience. I can imagine very different. And we've had Owen ask what your opinions are of tourists in Antarctica and Antarctic tourism in general. Do you believe that the continent should sort of remain protected for scientists only, or are there any measures that you think need to be taken in addition to what's already going on with tourists?
Well, I think that scientists, we try our best not to make any imprint, but there are, a number of scientists down there, and I think it would be a shame if tourists were to go there as well and double the amount of impact we're having. So I think that it still is important that we try and reduce that as much as we can. But
because where you're going now, there aren't any tourists in the dry valleys, are there?
There are a few designated zones where cruise ships equipped with helicopters can basically take people in to have a look. I think it's a delicate situation, because the best way to preserve an environment or preserve a species is to raise awareness about it. And it's really hard to raise awareness without letting people there. Mm-hmm. So it's and right now I think a lot of tourists, most tourists, they come on boats and they remain shipbound for most of the time. And primarily when they go on land, they visit the research bases, which probably is more interesting to most people than just seeing a cold desert. But there is going to be, and moving forward, I think there will be increasing pressure to allow more tourists to visit different parts of the dry valleys, and that's something that we are working on right now, is to understand, which parts of the dry valleys are more amenable to that type of visitation, and which parts of the dry valleys are really fragile and should have more restriction on access imposed upon them. I think the best way to approach this is again through more information and better management.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of questions on penguins. Everyone's favorite part about Antarctica. Well, not everyone's, but I guess they're quite popular. Do you guys get to interact with them much during your work? Are they in the areas that you're working in, or are they closer to the coast?
Did you see one at all?
I saw some from a distance and from the helicopter itself. I had a camera that had good zoom on it, so I was fortunate for that. Yeah.
No, penguins by and large. Penguins by and large stay in coastal colonies, and we're a long way from those. So we do see penguins very, very occasionally. I've seen 3 in the past few years I've been down there, and those are the ones that walked up to me. But unfortunately, the ones that I see in this manner are not long for the world because they were very, very lost. So they wouldn't survive more than 24, 48 hours.
So it's almost a bad thing if you see them, you know they're going the wrong way, and you kind of want to send them back to the coast.
The thing that's surprising, just on that subject, outside of Scott Base, it was surprising for me just how many seals were just hanging out there for the whole time. So there's lots and lots of seals everywhere. But you cannot go closer than 10 meters, but you can still get quite close. So that was,
I was going to say, are they friendly or are they a little bit aggressive?
They don't move. They're not bothered.
They're grumpy creatures. Actually, penguins are pretty grumpy too.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, that's just ruined everyone's perceptions.
Yeah,
They look so happy.
It's things I wouldn't believe.
Damn. Okay. Well, no one's going to be loving the penguins after this, but they are cute still, right? Up close.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good at least. Daniel has a fun question, which I don't know if is quite your scientific area of expertise, but hypothetically, if someone was to transport some polar bears to Antarctica, could they wipe out the penguin population there?
That's a really good question. I had that asked of me a few days ago. I think they would do okay, because actually, penguins wouldn't be their primary source of food. I think seals probably be their primary source of food. They may struggle with finding access to ice because sea ice doesn't break out in Antarctica until very, very late in the season. What polar bears need is sort of the sea ice that's partially broken out, big enough for them to stand on and float on. I don't know if Antarctica would support that kind of lifestyle.
Absolutely. No, that's a very, very good answer. And Kayla has asked, Gemma, what is your favorite part about being in Antarctica when you're down there?
I think my favorite part would have been just how special I felt to be there and how amazing the landscape was. I just wanted to take photos all the time. Everything was really picturesque, and everybody who's down there really has worked hard to get there, and so everyone appreciates everything, and it makes it a really nice experience.
Absolutely. And how about you, Charles? What's your favorite part?
At this point, I would say seeing what we had spent months planning coming into action and working as expected rather than blowing up. Because I think from my perspective, somebody who's as a senior scientist, I think there's a lot of responsibility to make sure that things go smoothly and make sure that Gemma gets whatever she wants to do done. And I think it was very satisfying to see all that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds wonderful. And we have a lot of questions about potential jobs, how people can get work in Antarctica. What are some of the positions that you guys, well, not you in particular, I suppose, but that researchers look for when hiring people to come and work in Antarctica? Is it only scientists? Do they need other professions? Do they need IT people? Do they need human resources people? We also have Marlo, who's asking if there are jobs for future forensic scientists down in Antarctica.
I think I was surprised how many Defence Force people were working down there. So there are a lot of people in the Army and the Air Force, and not so many in the Navy, but all the jobs, like listening to the radios, because while we're out in the field, we have to radio in every day and make sure that we're okay, and driving all the diggers and doing all the rubbish and all that sort of thing. So there's lots of those types of jobs as well, and they need electricians and mechanics and everything just to keep the place running, and chefs and cleaners. And yeah.
I would say the most universal advice I can give is to be very good at what you do, because we need all types of people. We need chefs, we need IT people. Not we, but I mean Antarctica, New Zealand. And we need carpenters, we need electricians, we need mechanics. But the one requirement for to be down there is that they have to be really good at their jobs. So whatever you pick, try and be good at it. And for forensic scientists, I suppose there is an opportunity because in a lot of the preservation work that the Antarctic Heritage Trust does, I would say that there's scope for a forensic scientist to participate. But then again, you need to be a good one because there are plenty of forensic scientists out there, and for you to be picked, you need to be good.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of, I mean, do you just need to be studying biology? Obviously, if you are going into science as a researcher, are there roles for people who've done maths, IT, physics, chemistry, things other than biology?
Well, certainly ice research and atmospheric research is a big component of researching Antarctica. So, and there's plenty of working groups within New Zealand that work on sea ice dynamics, ice shelf dynamics, and so on. But generally speaking, I would say that you need to be in science of some kind to participate in Antarctic research. And as a high school student or as a university student, I think it's important that you not necessarily do any subject, because, like I said, the spectrum is very wide. You could go from biology all the way to quantum physics, but take the basic courses and really try and do well, and then when you graduate, and this is generally speaking the first opportunity for somebody to be engaged in Antarctic research is at a postgraduate level. In a postgraduate, you could look around and say, you know, I'm really interested in doing this type of work, and you could contact researchers who are already active in those areas and see if there's a scope or an opportunity for you to participate. And if you really, really are interested, there's absolutely nothing wrong at all with engaging those researchers and say, you know, I'm going to university this year. I would like to do what you do in the future. What do I need to take right now? And I think most people would be happy to give you that advice.
Absolutely. I think it'd be very flattering having someone want to get involved in what you're working on, especially when you guys are both so passionate about your work, obviously. And I assume most people down in Antarctica are very passionate about what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me, we've talked about the best part about working in Antarctica. What's the strangest experience that you guys have had while down there?
Strange experience. I once saw a middle-aged German gentleman dancing in short skirts. That was the most disturbing.
In the snow?
Well, there was a dress party at Scott Base, which is a tradition, and this German gentleman was enjoying himself far too much.
Well, at least he wasn't just kind of wandering out of the ice somewhere. That would be a little bit disturbing. No. How about you, Gemma?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's hard to say. It's quite a quick turnaround from when we get back from the field. From when we go home, we have a lot of organising to do. So, I guess, yeah, when you have a small group of people in a small space for a long period of time out in the field, that's definitely some interesting.
Yeah, but what happens on the ice stays on the ice.
Like a trip to Vegas. I love it. And how do you guys shower when you're out there? Are you able to have baths or showers, or do you just sort of? And how long do you stay actually? What's a regular trip period?
For the showers, it's baby wipes all the time. Baby wipes everywhere. Mm-hmm. We were out in the field for what, 2.5 weeks? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe 2 weeks.
Yeah, between 2.5 and 2 weeks.
And how many people? Sorry. Please continue.
No,
I was going to say, how many people in your group normally when you're camping out there?
We had a very, very large camp this year. We started out at 12. It grew to 23 at some point. We didn't find out that it was going to be this big until we got to Scott Base. But that was a surprise. So this year was kind of exceptional for us. It was a very large event. But typically speaking, a field team would be between 4 to 6 people.
Absolutely, makes it a bit more manageable, I suppose. And Frederick has asked, how do electronic devices work in that extreme cold temperature? Do you use computers? Do they work the same way they do here? Do you need to heat them up? Do they ever freeze?
When we're in the main tent, all the laptops and things, they work fine because it's warm because we have the heater on. But in the cold, the batteries do die a lot faster. So for the cameras, normally with my camera, I had it inside my shirt and then zipped my jacket on top just to keep it so that it stays warm. The other thing is that because it's a dry environment, something else to consider is all the static. So you have to be careful not to touch the memory cards, etc., because it can actually wipe everything off them. So that's something you have to be careful that you might not think about.
Yeah. No, I mean, where we were, it was, I would say, in absolute temperature terms, it's not much colder than the South Island in the winter.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably warmer. Certainly warmer than Canada at the same time of the year. So I would say that apart from keeping your batteries warm, there's well, there's also dirt because the environment is very dry and it's very dusty. So I've had a zoom lens on my camera die from getting grit into the focus mechanism. So I had to have that fixed. But at much colder temperatures, going back to Erebus again, we discovered that at -40, the screen in your laptop will freeze because the L in LCD stands for liquid, and it froze at -40.
I had no idea.
It wasn't permanent, so you just have to let it warm up.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, it's just stuff that I guess every time you go down, you find something new, that you learn something new that you wouldn't have thought about not working there. And how does the weather? I mean, we talked a little bit about storms coming in. How does that affect your research? If it's a stormy summer, can you not go out in the field very much? Are you sort of tent bound, or can you get your work done still, regardless of the weather?
In the last few days, we had a lot of snow. Well, not a lot, a little bit of snow, and that wasn't really an issue for me at all. I just put my jacket on and carried on, and it was fine. Wind could probably make it more difficult with your microbe sampling.
Well, I think wind just makes it more difficult in general because being exposed to 30-knot wind for more than a couple of hours at a time, I mean, it mentally drains your mental energy. Like you feel exhausted just in that wind. It's unrelenting. But there are, I mean, having thick snow accumulation on the ground can be a safety issue as well because you can't see the ground, and therefore you don't see what you're stepping on, and the chance of you twisting your ankle is much, much greater when that happens. Or stepping through thin ice and falling into a pond. So I would say that having bad weather does make you tent bound, especially if there's a lot of snow on the ground. But otherwise, it's just the wind. If the wind keeps up, it really is exhausting.
And the other thing with the wind is we have like plastic bags and bits of paper and pencils and things we're trying to use for our sampling. So if it gets very windy, then it's kind of hard to hold on to everything at the same time. So that's another factor.
Absolutely. And we've had Marlo ask about both of your research. Are your findings relatable to real-world issues? And how so? What have you discovered? So basically, what can the work on springtails tell us about sort of real-world problems, and what can the work on microbes tell us about real-world applications, I suppose?
So for springtails, I'm just starting out my research, so I don't have any results yet, but what I'm hoping to find is a difference in the genetic populations. So if ones that are active when it's warm are genetically different to ones that are active when it's cold, then if the temperatures can continue to increase with climate change, then will that cause the population that's active when it's cold to be outcompeted and die out? And if it does, then that's a loss of biodiversity, and it means that perhaps the population is going to have less ability to adapt to further changing environmental conditions. And I guess as more of a global perspective, if this is what's happening to Antarctic animals, then maybe this is going to happen to other animals around the world as well. And I guess because Antarctica might be sort of the first to respond, so it's kind of a preliminary indicator of what might happen elsewhere.
Yeah, I would say that we certainly can view Antarctica as a model system that gives us insight into a lot of processes. And because for us to understand what goes on in the environment around us, we need to understand a lot of the fundamental processes underpinning them. And quite often, the environment around us is far too complex to understand. And so, as scientists, we always have to basically tackle a problem at a plausible scale, and to go out and say, what would happen to an entire forest if the climate changed a little bit is really hard to say. But if you can understand incrementally what happens first to the microorganisms and what happens to the springtails, what happens to the invertebrates, what happens to the insects, and you tackle it one piece at a time, that gives you a much better chance of understanding what's happening. And Antarctica provides us with the opportunity to take this reductionistic approach to understanding basic processes around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a perfect sort of environment to be able to test those things and see what's happening, I guess, in a much simpler ecosystem, as you said. And we've had Sawyer Griffin ask, what is the biggest organisation that is currently operating in Antarctica? And Dean wants to know, are they mainly Australian and New Zealand researchers down there, or is it a mix of American and Europeans working there as well?
This is gonna get me into trouble. I'm gonna guess that the largest organization is different depending on which metric you pick. I think that probably operates the largest number of bases, but the Americans probably spend most money. And so I think it depending on how you define large, a number of different programs would be in the forefront. I would say the Chinese and the Americans are certainly among the biggest. Because Scott Base is only a stone's throw from McMurdo Station. It's only a 5-minute drive to McMurdo Station. There's certainly a lot of cross-fertilization between the two programs. So, for example, this year we had a American science event sharing our tent with us, and that, of course, increases the number of international researchers in our team instantly. And then we also had researchers from Canada, from Germany, and South Africa. And in previous seasons, we've had researchers from Hong Kong, from Korea, from Spain, from Portugal. So it's a very international environment. I think it would be unusual for a base to be entirely Australian or to be entirely Kiwi.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're almost out of time, but a few more quick questions. Andrew's been asking about the logistics of working down there. I know we've talked about getting everything shipped in and shipped out, but do you get everything at the start of your trip, or do you have to rely on sort of weekly supply drops?
It depends. I think it depends on the scope of your operations. We do rely on resupply, but mostly I would say the main reason for that is because we have samples that have to go back. So there's no point taking everything out to start, because if we have to have a helicopter come out and take our samples back. But certainly, if you manage, if the type of your operation allows it, you could go out with all your supplies and stay out there for 3 months. This does happen. People do that. But for us, because we have samples constantly going back to Scott Base, that's not how we operated.
How far is the helicopter trip between Scott Base and the dry valleys that you guys are working in?
I think it was about 35 minutes. Yeah, it's quite a long way.
And what are you, in the future, are you hoping to both stay working down in Antarctica? What's next for you both?
Well, I have the next year for analysing my samples and writing my thesis, but I don't really know what's going to happen for me in the future. I guess there is potential if I want to do a PhD or do some sort of other work, then I guess, yeah. if I put the effort in. If it's something I want to do, then I can.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, at this point, we're certainly going back next year, and we're hoping to get funding to go back for the next 4 to 6 years. So for the foreseeable future, because there's so many scientific questions that remain to be answered in Antarctica, and that are very of great interest to me. So I would certainly be going back in the future if I can.
Absolutely. And we have one final question from Naren, who said, what kind of research is being done in Antarctica that could benefit space programs around the world? I don't know if there's any, but an interesting...
Antarctica is a great, I mean, there's a lot of astrophysics research being done, particularly at South Pole. There's not a lot of New Zealand funded programs to do that because we're talking very, very big money. And I think we also, by looking at Antarctica, you also have, ironically, you can gain insight into the history of the planet because of the thick ice sheet that we can drill into, and that would reveal a lot about what happened to the planet in previous eons. So in somewhat indirect ways, a lot of research in Antarctica is related to space and astronomical research, but I wouldn't be able to any direct examples because I'm not an astrophysicist.
But I guess it's an interesting prospect for future research, and any potential astrophysicists out there watching, you could be heading to Antarctica soon for work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, you guys. Sadly, we're out of time. Have we missed anything that you think the audience may like to know that people don't often know about your work in Antarctica, or do you think we've covered most of it?
I think we've done a pretty good job. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good range of questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much to everyone who's watching and asked questions. We really appreciate it. And of course, thank you to the University of Waikato in New Zealand for sponsoring our Hangout today. If you're interested in researching down in Antarctica or working down there or studying and finding out more about some of the work being done, there'll be a link in the description of this video. You can find out some more about studying at Waikato. And most of all, thank you to Gemma and Charles for being such great guests and answering all our questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we'll see you soon, and we'll be hosting lots more Hangouts. So keep following ScienceLet on Facebook and Twitter, and let us know if there are any scientists you'd like us to speak to next. Have a great day, guys.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.